Record. Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are here with Coach Brandon Laird, former head coach at Sacramento State University men's basketball, who is in his first appearance, the all-time most downloaded episode, because he was dropping a ton of wisdom for everybody. And we're hoping that in this second appearance, we can talk through what has changed in the last 2 years since we recorded. I believe he was one of the first 10 episodes, but on November 5th, 2021, Coach Laird went from being the associate head coach to the head coach and had a huge transition. And we want to talk about what lessons we learned along the way and how that journey has grown him as a coach and as a man, and as a father. And we're happy to have you, Coach.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it. And I remember during our first conversation in the first podcast, we talked about a lot of different things. And one of them was the transition from going from an assistant coach to a head coach. And I feel like I've had that experience again, and this experience was entirely different. And I feel like I learned a lot more this time. And I feel like not only have I learned a lot more, but I also feel like the game has evolved. The challenges are different now for coaches, and certainly excited to share my experiences with anybody who wants to listen and learn from them.
Well, I'm super excited having had both Coach on and then you on, and then that shift happened and we got to kind of watch from afar. But let's kind of dig into how we got where we are now. And if we could go back to that November 5th, you're coming off of an exhibition game against Simpson, and you walk into the office the next day and it's like, hey, here's what's happening. Talk us through that and what that moment was like for you and the things that you needed to figure out in that instant.
Yeah, well, let me rewind you to the night before, Thursday, November 4th. We have an exhibition game against Simpson at our place. We play okay. Coach Katz, being Coach Katz, he's on fire and he's coaching his heart out, and he's frustrated at halftime that we're not, firing on all cylinders. And the game ends, and we go home, and we get a text that night, our coaching staff, and it says 6 a.m. staff meeting tomorrow, which wasn't totally unexpected. But then it said 7 a.m. team meeting, and it kind of was like, wait, what's going on here? Kind of caught us all by surprise. Walk into the office at 6 a.m. on Friday morning, November 5th, and Coach had cleared his office out. All the pictures were off the walls. Desk was clean, and myself and the other assistant coaches are looking at each other with shock and awe and disbelief. And Coach is already emotional and proceeds to tell us that due to an ongoing health issue that was exacerbated the night before, he had made the decision to step down. That he had went home after the game and talked with his wife and had an ongoing consultation with his doctor, and it was time for him to hang things up and move on. So in that moment, there is a range of emotions and feelings. Number one, is Coach okay? Mm-hmm. Number two, how is everyone going to respond to this? The players, the team, the program, the community. Number three, I'm assuming I'm next in line. What am I going to do? So we move into the team meeting with the guys at 7 a.m. Super, super emotional, super unexpected. Shock and awe is the word that I would use. It's not what anyone expected. And from there, it moved into meetings with the athletic director and the administration, follow-up meetings with the team. And then by about noon or 1 o'clock that day, I was named interim coach for the rest of the season. Phone is going crazy. I'm communicating with my wife and my family about what's happening. And then at some point that afternoon, I go home and literally shut my phone off and kind of lock myself in a room for about 30 minutes and try to collect my thoughts and get prepped for what, in my opinion, was going to be the most important meeting of my life with this group. I was having them over to the house at 5 o'clock that evening. We were going to regroup, have some pizza, and talk. And that's kind of how things got started at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that had to be hair blown back. I mean, neither of us have much hair, but at the end of the day, we're not expecting
You're
that
better
move.
than me in that department, brother.
And as we think about what you had to get prepped for, I mean, the list is lengthy. And I do remember in our last conversation where you specifically talked about having a box that you kept where you put all of your things in for the next time you had an opportunity. And we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. But what I want to do at the front end of this, before we get into what you've learned along the journey, is I really want to kind of, put a nail in the coffin here on how things closed out, where you had your year, you coached those guys into the Big Sky tournament, you won a game, you got to the second round, and then that interim tag comes off and you're interviewing for the head job, you're working along with administration, and they make a decision to go a different direction. And as part of that, there was some stuff that ended up in the paper that was accurate and somewhat inaccurate based on what I know was shared with the group, and that you shared with the group, and how you were outwardly supportive of the new coach. But I want to take this opportunity for you to have some closure in regards to, hey, this is what happened. This is where I was. Here's where I'm at now, and what I learned through that process. And then I want to talk about the journey and what you learned throughout the years of being there, and everything you took with you.
Yeah, sure. So you're going back to front on me here.
I am.
Yeah, look, so in a lot of ways, this was the most exhilarating, fun 6 months of my life. Coaching the team, being a head coach. It was a lifelong dream, working and coaching in Sacramento. I think I had said a number of times during the year, it was my dream job. And it's something that I spent 11 years with Coach Katz, waiting for that opportunity, kind of never knowing when the opportunity was going to come. And so again, it was challenging and exhilarating and fun, but also frustrating in a lot of ways. And when things ended, I expressed my frustration. And based on the circumstances, I felt like I handled it the best way I could. I was honest. I was genuine. I feel bad that some people were unfairly dragged into the situation that maybe they shouldn't have been. And I did my best to apologize to those people if I unfairly dragged them into that. But at the end of the day, I wasn't happy with how things ended. And that doesn't mean not me getting the job, but I wasn't happy with how things ended. And I expressed my frustration. And quite honestly, as far as I'm concerned, that's it for me. End of story. Moving forward. And part of moving forward, I think for me, was also reflecting on the previous 11 years and what we accomplished, what Coach Katz was able to accomplish there. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that and the very small role I played in that, and how that has prepared me for everything I'm ready to tackle moving forward.
Love it. I love it. And I would love for you, if you don't mind, to tap into some of those things that you'd accomplish. Like, let's think about that for a minute before we dive into the long journey of, here are all the specifics I learned that year and what I'm going to apply the next time. But no, like, here's the 11 years we had. Here's some accomplishments that we were able to do collectively as a program. Here's how we were able to set these guys up for life. If we could take a few minutes to honor those and talk about those. I mean, the Coach Katz era at the school, regardless of what anybody's outside optics might be, was probably one of the most stable times in that program's history, being a Sacramento guy myself.
Yeah, nobody can deny what Coach Katz did for Sacramento State, and it's amazing. It's simply amazing. And I joined Coach Katz in year 4, so he'd been there 3 years before I got there. Coach Katz at Sac State for 14 years, and I was there for 11 years. And you were absolutely right. Without any doubt, it was the best decade in the history of the basketball program for that university. And Coach Katz, when he took the job, I think everyone has to rewind and remember what the job looked like when he took it. There were a lot of really talented players there, a lot of really good guys, a lot of alumni that bleed green and gold. But it was a challenging situation for Coach Katz. I believe when he took over, He was taking over a program that had only won 2 games or 4 games the year before he got there. I want to say they were like on a 50-game road losing streak or something like that. And let's just not beat around the bush. I think a lot of people looked at the job as one of the most challenging jobs in all of Division I, and maybe the worst job on the West Coast. And there were a lot of people who wouldn't even touch the job. And Coach Katz is the one person with the conviction and the spirit and the pride and the guts to dig in there with 2 feet and say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it the right way. And that's the other thing. I think people said you're never going to be able to do things the right way there. You're not going to be able to recruit good kids. You're not going to be able to graduate them. You're not going to be able to build a culture. You're not going to have kids who care. It's a commuter school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And after 14 years, you can look back and say, well, Coach Katz graduated 98% of his guys. I don't know what the number, I think it's 49 out of 50, somewhere in there. National Coach of the Year in 2015. 1 basket away from winning the Big Sky Conference tournament. Couple winning seasons in there, a couple seasons around 500 when they've never even sniffed or came close to being above 500. And here's the thing that I think was, as I reflected on this, and I can go on and on and on, I think at one point there was, right now, maybe 12 active guys who are playing professionally, which is awesome. The number 1 pick in the G League draft, Eric Studeville. I mean, think about that. The number 1 pick in the G League draft out of Sacramento State. Cody Demps, 10-day contracts with the Sacramento Kings. He's in the league out of Sacramento State. Those types of things are unheard of previously. And Coach Katz moneyballed this thing for 14 years. What he did was created a program that targeted and valued assets that he knew fit his model. And it wasn't perfect, and I'm sure we missed on guys over the years, but what we were able to do was identify guys that wanted to be coached, that were good teammates, cared about graduating, and cared about the university. And that last part, to me, was huge. I think that in today's culture of college basketball, the most impressive thing to me was that not one of those marquee top players transferred. Mike McKinney, Dylan Garrity, Cody Demps, Nick Hornsby, Eric Studeville, Marcus Graves, Justin Strings, Ethan Esposito, Bryce Fowler, and I'm probably missing some guys in there. Every single one of those guys was committed to Coach Katz, committed to their teammates, committed to the university. Their level of pride and the way they cared was something that didn't exist 14 years ago, I believe, when Coach Katz took over. And I know that Coach Katz always defined success as those guys. He would always say this to the team: we would have a successful team if you're naming your kids after each other and you're showing up at each other's weddings. And you look at all of those guys now, and they're tied at the hip. It's amazing. There's a brotherhood, there's a continuity, there's a love and an appreciation for each other and for the program. And I know there might be a narrative that, hey, well, you never won. You didn't win a championship. You can go to the NCAA tournament. Okay, true. I think, and not making any excuses, we got snake bitten a couple times. 2015, we're a foul call away and a back iron shot away from winning it. The following year, I thought our team was loaded. I get this question a lot. Well, what happened after that team? How come you couldn't sustain success? I thought our team in 2016 might have been better than the 2015 team. We started out the year 7-3. We had a win at Arizona State, a win at Seattle. We beat our rival UC Davis. We were rocking and rolling. We go into league, and Cody Demps, who's probably going to be league MVP that year, gets hurt in our first league game, and he's out for 6 to 8 weeks. And that changes the trajectory of the season. Marcus Graves, who's currently playing in the G League for the Milwaukee Bucks G League team. He gets hurt in 2018, his senior year. I would have loved to see a senior year with Marcus Graves and Justin Strings together. What would that have looked like? And how does that change the narrative? Maybe that group wins 18 to 20 games.
Yeah.
In 2020, the year COVID hit, we're in the second round of the Big Sky tournament. And I actually think that arguably may have been our best team. We had 5 pros on that team: Brandon Davis, Bryce Fowler, Ethan Esposito, Joshua Patton, and Christian Terrell was redshirting for us. But the team was loaded, absolutely loaded. And we're in the second round of the Big Sky tournament, and COVID hits and shuts us down. Maybe we win the Big Sky tournament. Maybe we're in the CBI or CIT. And does that change the narrative that Coach Katz and this group wasn't as successful as we could have been? And then after that COVID hits, we shut down for, the 2 COVID years, make what you want out of it. And then look, I know I'm kind of rambling here, but the reality is what Coach did at Sacramento State, he recruited good kids. We recruited locally, which people told him he couldn't do. We took guys with 0 scholarship offers or sometimes 1 scholarship offer and turned them into all league players. There was a development system in place. They cared academically. They graduated. They cared about the university. They cared about each other. And the level of pride just doesn't exist sometimes in today's college basketball. And so, look, I'm played a very small part in all that, and I'm grateful to have played a very small part of that. And I take a lot of pride in that as well. And I know that everybody who was in that program would say the same thing. I mean, they earned it in the dirt. Coach Katz built that thing from the ground up, literally.
Yeah, no doubt. I got to watch the early years of that when he was one of my mentors at Delta. And then when he made that shift, and, John Burks was working for him as a manager and part of that, and Travis, and we got to see that firsthand. I want to wrap this up really quickly before we dive into your journey here and ask if you could point out maybe 1 or 2 things that are shareable and potentially doable for anyone who maybe can't recruit the guys they want, and, the things that you spoke about, but still create the culture that Coach was always able to create, which led to that loyalty. People aren't transferring. They support one another, naming, their kids after their teammates and going to weddings. Like, what are a couple of the things that you could offer that are just like, look, these are transformational, and like, this is a big part of why we were able to do what we were able to do from that standpoint of building community and relationship?
2 things that jump out, and this was the most important thing. And I think this is the hardest thing in recruiting now, especially with the transfer rule. The non-negotiable in recruiting for Coach Katz and for us over the last 11 years is that Sacramento State had to be your number 1 choice. You had to want to be there. And again, I think we lost guys that maybe we could have got because they were on the fence or it was 50-50. But the moment Coach Katz sensed that Sacramento State wasn't where you wanted to be, or it wasn't in your heart, then that was a big red flag for him. Okay, because when you commit your heart to a place, you're going to stick through the tough times. You're going to stick through the tough coaching. You're going to stick through the adversity. Number 2, a big part of this, and people say they want to be coached, but not everybody wants to be coached. All right. And I remember, again, in the recruiting process, we would always laugh as a staff. Coach Katz would throw zingers at guys in front of their parents during the recruiting process. And we would all be like cringing, like, no, Coach, you're going to scare them away. And Coach would say something like, you don't play hard enough, or you're not, you think you're a good shooter? Yeah, I think I'm a good shooter. Well, I don't think you're a good shooter. That's kind of how the recruiting process would go sometimes. It was like, and what Coach was doing is he was coaching them, and he was testing them to see how they were going to respond to coaching. So 2 things. Again, I could go on and on. We could do a whole podcast, Justin, about the way the guy holds the ball, what his body language is when he misses a shot, how we evaluated deep inner confidence. I mean, we had a bullet point checklist of what we would look for, but the 2 non-negotiables that I think were really integral to the success was, number 1 was Sac State in his heart. Is that really where he wanted to be, which allowed for those great relationships with teammates. And number 2, did he really want to be coached? Yeah. Could he really accept the critique and the criticism that would allow him to get better? And so again, when you look at and Eric Studeville from Castro Roble High School,
Yep.
who had one other scholarship offer from Southern Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 years later, he's the #1 pick in the G League draft. That's because of Coach Katz's micromanaging of his coaching and his development process, and the fact that Eric bought into that and really wanted to be there. And Eric's one example of many.
Right.
Many.
Well, it's funny that those two that you mentioned, and we could go on for hours just on these little Katzisms, but I remember Isaac talking about how he used to chart negative body language like during games.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's a whole next level for me. I'm trying to manage all these other things, but that's one more for people to think about. All right, let's pivot now into the Laird coaching journey. And just to update the audience, once I asked the question here, if you could give the quick resume here, where you were head coach, assistant coach, head coach, back into it, and where we're at. Because the first thing I want to know, once you tee us up with that, is what did you learn moving that 18 inches again in that moment with no prep? How was that different than the last time?
Well, I sent you, and this has been a big part of my reflection over the last 4 or 5 months, was spending a lot of time thinking about what I learned. And I sent that to you, and I know that's going to be a big part of our conversation. So I'm not going to go through all of those bullet points at this moment. What I would say, again, just a small recap of the Brandon Laird coaching journey is, I was fortunate enough to play basketball at UC Davis and win a national championship. Got into coaching right after that with you at El Camino High School for a year. Moved back to UC Davis for a year. Went to Menlo College with Kevin Nosek for 6 years. Was fortunate enough, and I know this, we talked about this, to become a head coach at Menlo College when I was 28. And so I was an assistant coach at Menlo. Kevin left. I took over for 3 years. And that experience was significantly different than the experience I had this time. And I know we're going to talk about that. Left Menlo, rejoined UC Davis in the Big West with Coach Gary Stewart. And then from UC Davis, went back to Sac State with Coach Katz for 11 years. So I was a head coach at Menlo College when I was 28. I was associate head coach with Coach Katz at Sac State when I was 33. And then took over as the head coach at Sac State on an interim basis this past year when I was 44. And that's kind of the recap of the journey there.
Thank you for the reminder, Coach. That's going to be helpful for the audience. After listening to that and remembering that you got your first taste of this at 28, and then you got away from it for quite some time. God, I really want to know, what was the first thing that just punched you in the mouth after the exhilaration of being put into that role and all the things that come with it in the prep work? But then right away, it was like, hey, boom, didn't expect this.
Yeah. Well, let's back up maybe to the meeting, right? The meeting in my backyard, I thought it went really well. I was really genuine with the guys and really honest about who I was. And it's funny you mentioned the box, because I brought the box out and I showed the team. I said, guys, this is my 20 years of preparation for this job, and not only did I talk about my coaching experience, but I talked about who I was as a man, who I was as a husband, who I was as a father. And I shared a lot of my life experiences with the guys. And that, for me, was the way we kind of teed up the season, the things that I thought were important. And I told the guys that there were going to be 3 things that I wanted to accomplish this year. Number one, we want to do things what we call the Sac State way. This has been established by previous teams, and this is how this program operates. And that was important because we had 15 guys on our roster. And I'm kind of setting the table here for you, and I think this will make sense as we move forward. We had 15 guys on our roster. 8 of them were new to the program. All right. 10 of the 15 were freshmen or sophomores. We only had 2 seniors. All right. So we had a really young team and a new team. And so I said, hey, I want to make sure that when this season ends, that you understand the Sac State way, that you're committed to it. Number 2, that you stay connected throughout the course of the season. Okay. And number 3, that you have fun. All right. And number 2 and number 3 were really important for me because I was realistic right away in knowing that I was an interim coach, that I think, and this is the truthful part of it as well. Everybody sitting in the backyard that night knew that we were going to have to do something amazing in order for me to maintain the job. And that was I walked into that interim title knowing that, quite frankly, Justin, between you and I think the team knew this as well, that if we didn't win the Big Sky tournament, or we didn't advance the NCAA tournament, or we weren't like a top 3 team, I wasn't going to get the job. You and I had talked about this in podcast 1. People like change. People want change. And this was an opportunity for the university to rebrand itself and move in a different direction. And I don't begrudge them for that. Right. I think it was teed up for them in that way. And we were all realistic sitting in the backyard that night that we had one goal. And our goal was to be the best team that we could be by the end of the year, knowing that, quite frankly, we were probably going to have to win the conference tournament and get to the NCAA tournament to keep this thing together. Right. So staying connected and having fun was a big part of that. The last thing that I wanted as an interim coach was for that thing to fracture.
Right.
All right. And I set the table on that because my experience and the things I learned this time were significantly different than what I learned the first time. And they're significantly different because there was a whole set of challenges that I didn't have to face. And I really felt like I was walking through the fire every day. And that fire and those challenges really, really helped me learn what being a head coach was all about.
For sure.
And in a lot of ways, I failed. And a lot of ways, those challenges and those hurdles were too much for me as a leader and too much for our team to overcome. But those were great lessons for me that I can now share with others, that I can also keep for myself, knowing as I move forward, it's going to make me a better coach and a better person. So I went through and kind of bullet pointed, and there's a lot more than this, but bullet pointed 10 things, which I called the not so obvious lessons that you will learn when you transition from an assistant coach to a head coach. And I think a lot of people can right now pinpoint the obvious ones, but it's the not so obvious ones that for me were really eye-opening this year. And they were a lot different than my experience at Menlo College as well.
Yeah, which is ironic, and I'm chuckling inside because I think on the first episode and many others, I mean, you had as good a prep for that job as anyone, right? The Menlo job, which you had, and then you went back in and you had as good a prep as anyone, and it's still, you're not ready. No matter what you think, we're not ready for what's coming.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is I was ready for this one.
Yep.
Right. Like I spent 11 years as Coach Katz's right-hand man.
Yep.
And I should have said this earlier when I was talking about, the 11 years with Coach Katz. For me, there reached a point where I didn't want to leave Sac State anymore. Okay. I think in my early years 3, 4, 5, I was young in my coaching career. I was 33, 34, 35. I wasn't married yet. And I thought this job was a lily pad job where it was going to lead me to something else. And I explored other opportunities early in my career at Sac State, and I've talked to Coach Katz about all those. But then there reached a time, maybe by like year 6, where I looked around and I said, hey, like, this is invaluable. Like, working with Coach Katz is gold. I equate it to, you remember in the medieval times when you had to have an apprenticeship to become like a blacksmith?
Yep.
You had to have an apprenticeship to become like a master painter.
Yep.
For me, this was my apprenticeship.
Yep.
Going to work with Coach Katz every day, knowing that he was giving me everything that Carol Williams and Dick Davey had given him.
Right.
Was a master apprenticeship in coaching, leading, practice planning, developing.
Yep.
So I was 1000% prepared for this job.
Yep.
However, as we all know, it just doesn't always work like that.
Absolutely.
And I think we can get into that, and you might as well. I'll talk about some of these. And look, I'm going to say this.
I'm going to give you a primer though, Coach. People that are listening and you're not driving, get out a pad of paper, because this is going to be a list of things that will be a great roadmap for you as an assistant, as a head coach. This is as good a list as I've seen in any of these episodes. So get out a pen.
I appreciate that. And let me put an asterisk next to this. I'm not making any excuses here. All right. I am not. own all of this and just say, hey, there were a ton of challenges for me this year. Yep. Challenges that even after the 11-year apprenticeship with Coach Katz, you don't know what you don't know until you get there. Right. And so taking over was one thing, transitioning as an interim coach 5 days before your first game was one thing. But then, and I'll throw a couple snippets out there just to frame this. We played Montana State at our place on it was a Saturday, December 4th. And then we played we opened after Christmas against Southern Utah, December 30th. So there was a 26-day gap there. We had one game in between those two with two cancellations. One cancellation at UC Riverside where we traveled, prepped, went and we're getting ready to play 10 minutes before the game. It's canceled. And a similar experience at Oregon State. Okay, so how do you develop your team? How do you transition into this new role with these extreme challenges? Okay, and then COVID hits. Mm-hmm. Our guys go home for Christmas. They come back and COVID's back. Yep. When we come back from Christmas and we restart league, 5 of our first 6 are on the road. Mm-hmm. With, in some ways, a depleted roster because of COVID. Mm-hmm. All right.
So we are prepared, but we plan and God laughs.
Let me say this, right? Like, I wasn't good enough to overcome these challenges. These are not excuses.
Right.
But this was the reality of the situation. And this, in my opinion, magnified the bullet points that I want to share. You know what I mean? And if I could go back, which I know you probably will ask, if I could go back, and I want to say go back because the fact that I learned these have prepared me for my next job. So the next time I'm a head coach, you better believe that these experiences will better assist me and better prep me for anything that comes my way.
Yeah.
And I just, quite frankly, again, I was not ready to handle some of these challenges.
Yeah. And even though you just said, if I could go back, actually, no, because you don't have these lessons if it shakes out differently. Right. So that's the paradox, right? If I had a do-over, but then I would lose all this knowledge. So let's get into it. What's the first one that you think was obvious, but also not so obvious?
So I said, number one, obvious when you transition is you got to have your protocols in place. Protocols meaning like, what are your road trip protocols? What are your social media protocols, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the obvious. The not so obvious is your first big decision as a head coach will be how you enforce these protocols. And these protocols are going to come up on your first road trip without a doubt. Okay. And I say this with love in my heart. I'm a parent. My young son pushes back on bedtime every night. When you give him one popsicle, he wants 2. All right. So when you set your road trip protocols and you're the new head coach, you better believe that your players are going to test those protocols. And I'm not going to, I'm never going to, I keep all of our stories in-house. But we traveled to Utah, played Utah, turned around and traveled and played San Luis Obispo. And that road trip, we lost at Utah and we won at Cal Poly. But that road trip for me was the first moment where, as a head coach, I had to look in the mirror and say, are you going to be true to your values? Can you discipline people, your team, true to what you said? Can you enforce your protocols? And here's the thing with that. Every single player in the program knows what those protocols are. Every assistant coach in the program knows what those protocols are. And everyone's looking at you to see what decision you're going to make in that moment. And that decision can make or break your season right there in that moment. And I'm not joking, and again, I'm not going to get into there. I will share a lot of stories. Those are some stories that I'll keep in house. I'm proud of how we handled some of those challenges on our first road trip. I think it set a tone for the guys of, hey, Coach Laird is no longer the cool assistant coach where, come on, coach, let's do this. He's the head coach and he's got to draw the line. And I think that's very important for anybody who's in this role. You better be prepared to draw that line, and you better be prepared to make some tough decisions
Yep.
even if that means sacrificing a game in that moment.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to what we talked about the last time and many times since. You go from a suggestion maker to a decision maker and wear everything that comes with it, right? And the joke that we've had on the pod is, when you're traveling, assistant coach van is full, head coach van is empty.
Oh, I experienced that too.
But no, it's super important. And like you said at the end, you may have to sacrifice some things for future improvement. And it's a temporary inconvenience, permanent improvement that you got to be committed to if it's a long game, which it generally is, right? We've talked about run your own race, right? We've talked about your path does not have to measure up with the person next to you. Your timeline may be different. How did that factor in to your decision making and what you learned in that area?
Yeah, that was really hard one as well for me. Knowing that I was an interim coach and knowing that we had to have a successful year. I think it's a little bit different if you have a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract, but it doesn't change the pressure of the moment. It doesn't change the pressure of wanting to win and wanting a full roster and wanting to not deal with some of these things. A lot of times you say, well, let's just sweep it under the rug and get to the game and try to play, but what that does is I think that creates a lot of cracks in your standards. I think every players are very smart. They look around and like, well, so-and-so got away with that and he's still playing. So I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden, your standards and your expectations start to slip. And I think there's a long-term effect with that.
No, absolutely. Number 2 that you had was it's a race to figure it out. The obvious. Talk about that and then what's not so obvious in that moment.
This is a Coach Katzism. It's a race to figure it out. All right. It's a race to figure out your team. It's a race to figure out your rotation. It's a race to figure out your style of play. And it's a race for your players to figure out where they fit into that. Mm-hmm. And the quicker you can figure it out, the better team you're going to be. Mm-hmm. So we always say it's a race. It's a race. It's a race. The clock is ticking. It's a finite clock that is ticking. And the quicker and the faster you can figure out your team, the more successful you're going to be. Okay. I think that's somewhat an obvious. The not so obvious on this is you cannot rush this process. You cannot force this process. And if you do, you risk damaging your team's psyche and morale. So here's the story that goes along with that. We played one of our best games of the year at the Golden One Center against our rival, UC Davis. Led start to finish, double-digit win. Team played just outstanding. They were fearless. They were confident. They shot the ball well. We defended well. We rebounded well. We thought we played well in all 3 phases. 3 days later, we go to Arizona and just get our teeth kicked in by what I thought was the best team that I've ever seen in person in my 20 years of coaching. Mm-hmm. You do your best to try to wipe the Arizona game away. But I remember we were traveling home from Arizona and we're now 3-3 and Big Sky play. Actually, it starts, they have an early season. They break up the segments. I don't want to get into the logistics of that, but we have Montana and Montana State come into town to open Big Sky play the first weekend of December. We have Montana on a Thursday night. We have Montana State on a Saturday. So we have a great win against UC Davis. We're 3-2. We have a really tough loss at Arizona where a lot of ways they stripped our confidence and we had to look in the mirror and say, gosh, we're not even where we think we should be in terms of figuring it out. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And I made a mistake. We got home, we traveled home from Arizona. We get off the bus and I called the team together and it's a Sunday afternoon. And I said, guys, we're going to win both games this weekend. We're going to be 2-0 after this weekend. We're putting all of our efforts, all of our effort, all of our energy into beating Montana and Montana State. And everything was about winning those 2 games, winning those 2 games, winning those 2 games. And I didn't tighten up as a coach, but I believe my demeanor went from fearless, aggressive, have fun, keep it loose, stay connected to win, 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 win. 3 days later, it's Thursday and Montana's in town. The game starts and we're down 20-2. Mm-hmm. And our team was a shell, an absolute shell of who we had been a week before at UC when we played UC Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked, I felt my demeanor was such that I was ready for a fight. It was kind of do or die. And the team just didn't respond well to that. It was different than everything we had talked about up to that point in terms of, hey, it's a race to figure it out. Let's focus on getting better. Let's focus on the improvement. We fight back. I think we may have even took the lead in the second half, but ultimately ended up losing to Montana by 5-10. Saturday comes, we play Montana State. 10 minutes in, we're down 22-8. The same thing again. As soon as the score goes the other direction, the guys now become paralyzed by winning and losing. Mm-hmm. And the point of that is we hadn't figured it out yet. We didn't know who we were. I didn't know who our team was. And I had put too much external pressure on them to win those games. And I thought that did a lot of damage to our psyche. And I thought it did a lot of damage to our morale. Mm-hmm. So my point is, it's a race to figure it out. But that race, to your point, you have to run your own race as a team. You have to run your own race as a coach. Mm-hmm. And you have to trust that your players are going to run that race in terms of figuring out the development process. And we're going to talk about this later as well. Like, winning is the outcome we all desire. But once you start putting the external pressure on winning, it takes the focus away from running that race of figuring your team out. And that did a lot of damage to us. So here we are on December 4th now, and we are now 3-5 on a 3-game losing streak. Right. You know, where a week before we were on a high, you know, after being 3-2 and beating UC Davis. And that was a tough, that then started for me, that's when things got real for me at that moment.
Yeah. Well, and I think the lesson that I hear, right, is outcomes are a byproduct of process. And you got to pour into the process every day, and the outcomes are going to be what they are, no matter how much you want them to be different. And that the more you try to manipulate those in advance, you're actually kind of taking steps backwards, where I joke, you don't win February games in November, but you're laying the groundwork to win those, but you can't speed up the process. And I think that's important, and something that I've talked about for years. Like, we don't talk about winning. It's like, we just, hey, we're going to do the best we can. We're going to compete, and we'll see what happens at the end of the day. Yeah. At the end of the game, it's celebrations, win or lose, and then we're out, right? And then we try to get back to the drawing board. And the wrap on that, right? The next step is this: how do you, as the head coach, now zero in on what's important on December 6th versus what's important on February 22nd in that moment, rather than trying to, because again, as an assistant, hey coach, we should put this plan. Hey, we should do this. We should do that. It's like, they got to filter all that. So let's talk about that in regards to how do you choose what to do and what not to do. And you and I have talked about it over the years. It's like, yo, man, simplicity wins. Like, keep it. We don't need all this extra stuff, but then sometimes you do. So how do you navigate that? What'd you learn there?
Well, I think it's kind of filter into point number 3 I have. So I'm going to answer that question and move into my point number 3. It's a race to figure it out. So you ultimately, you know, you're running your race and you're evaluating your team on your best night, which for us was that UC Davis game, on your worst moments, which was Arizona, Montana State up to that point. And you're trying to prioritize who you are. And really the thing is, at that moment, is just getting into practice and competing, communicating with the guys, communicating with the assistant coaches. And you said it, and this is the thing. You have to focus on 1% improvement. Mm-hmm. It's getting a little bit better each day. The bigger challenge on that is keeping the team's psyche and morale in the right spot. All right. Because here's what happened for us is our team was super competitive and we're super aggressive. And it's a race to figure our team out. So practices now all of a sudden turned into personal battles, right? And they turned into straight competitions where, yeah, guys were competing, but I think they started competing against each other instead of with each other. And so again, as coaches now, we kind of have to reel that in and focus on what's important, focus on the team, focus on the morale, focus on the psyche. And when you're running your race to figure it out, the players have the players are running that race as well. The players have to also figure out in that race where they fit in, and just prioritizing it. I don't think I always like to work in threes.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the 3 things we want to get better at this week.
Mm-hmm.
Try to get better in those areas, and then and go from there. And that takes me into point number 3, where you want to prioritize what is important. And you can't be great at everything. Okay. The not so obvious point is you must micromanage every detail. All right. And this is where I remember we'd be sitting in our staff meetings, and Coach Katz would be running through his bullet points of micromanaging details. And I remember as a staff, we're all kind of snickering with each other. Coach, that's not important. Coach, that doesn't matter. Coach, why are we focusing on this? Coach, why are we wasting our time on this? Blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But it's those small details which are going to make or break a player's development and are going to make or break your team winning or losing. And again, the winning or losing is affecting the psyche and the morale. Mm-hmm. Your player getting better affects their morale, right? So their development, but the development is all in the micromanagement of the small details. So it's this dichotomy of prioritize what's important, but yet you have to micromanage the heck out of these small details. So what are some of those small details I'm talking about? Shooting free throws. Our team was a really, really, really bad free throw shooting team. And I neglected it. I thought it was one of those things where it'll get better. They'll figure it out. No, like, you have to address it. You have to go spend time and practice on it. You have to go shoot with guys one-on-one. Mm-hmm. You have to, Coach Katz had guys write down on a note card what their shooting, their free throw process was. And then you have to hold them to that. Mm-hmm. And you have to shoot hundreds of free throws with them. Mm-hmm. And if you neglect that, and you're up 2 with 2 minutes to go, and you're shooting a 1-on-1, and that guy misses the front end of that 1-on-1, that has a really big impact on that game.
Yep.
Free throw blockouts. You can point it out on film. You can work on it, but if you're not working on it live, where you're getting pushed under the rim, things like that press attack. I can go on and on.
Let me ask a question, and you can answer it however you want, as long as you want. But how do you choose, right? Because ultimately, the things that you're listing, I'm guilty of as well. And it's like, I've made a choice that's not the hill I'm dying on. I'm going to put my energy over here. So how do you choose in that moment with the experience that you had going into this? And now that you've just lived, you work in threes. So is the coach supposed to take, these are the 3 things that we are constantly going to micromanage, everything else we're just going to let go? Or how do you do that?
I think that's where the experience of coaching comes in. I think I'm looking at this in hindsight, and I wrote this down on my notes. I think next time I'm a head coach, I'm going to be much better at getting to those things earlier, making an extra 5 minutes in practice for them.
Yep.
Spending the necessary time with the necessary guys.
Yep.
If it's free throw blockouts, which 2 guys are going to be in there. So
yep.
You might have to spend 10 or 15 minutes with the team. You might just have to spend 10 minutes with those guys before practice.
Yeah.
I think it's, to me, it's a race to figure it out.
Yep.
So you have to figure out what details you need to micromanage.
Yep.
And you have the experience now as a head coach to know those are the things that are going to bite you in the butt if you don't address them.
Yep.
And I didn't get to some of those things fast enough.
Right.
I neglected some of those things, and they bit us in the butt. I would probably say, and I told the team this in our first meeting: when they win, they're going to get the credit. When they lose, I'm taking the blame. Right. Quite honestly, we lost maybe 2 or 3 games on small details that was on me. Yep. That's on me. And next time I'm a head coach, how do you get to them? You make time for them.
Yeah,
you make time for them. Period. You find a way. Maybe it's film work. Maybe it's before practice. Maybe it's when guys are getting water. Maybe it's after practice. But as a head coach, you got to have the experience and the wherewithal to get to those things that are going to directly impact winning and losing.
No, I agree 100%. And I think the important piece that I want to highlight is those are different depending on who you are, what your personnel is like, what you're trying to do. But you can't be great at everything. You got to figure out what you can be great at and then chip away at those throughout the year. And I love that piece of advice. On number 4, you talked about being a head coach is fun. That's the obvious. What's the not so obvious?
The not so obvious, and you know this because you've been a head coach, Man, it's a really lonely existence, Justin. A really lonely existence, and nobody understands what you're going through. And here's the last piece: nobody cares as much as you do.
Yeah.
And it's something that you just don't understand. It's not a dark place, but it can be miserable at times.
Right.
There's constant pressure of how to improve.
Yeah.
There's a constant worry of things that are out of your control. Every time the phone rings, there's a hesitation that bad news is coming your way.
Yep.
You can never have a bad day as a head coach.
Right.
You can never bring negative energy into practice. You can never bring negative energy into the office.
Yeah.
And you're an ATM machine, but you're an ATM machine where people aren't making deposits. They're just making withdrawals all day. And so, ultimately, you are in charge of every decision and every outcome. And with that, again, there's this external pressure, and there's this loneliness, and there's this concern and this care that you just can't impart or explain to anybody else. And I think the thing that's fun about this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'd love to hear your 2 cents on this. That's the addicting part. That's the part that you love. To me, it's a mental tug of war in your brain to figure all this out.
Yeah.
It's a puzzle. It's a math problem that never ends. And it's addicting. It can be a healthy drug. It can be an unhealthy drug. And I think a lot of ways, this is where, it can really get to some coaches, because it's a mental drain, but at the same time, when it's fun, there's this exhilaration that comes from it. And that's the tug of war, where you're constantly trying to manage and balance all these things. So yeah, is being a head coach fun? Yeah, absolutely. It was awesome. I think I started this by saying it was, for me, some of the best 6 months of my life.
Yep.
But it's draining, and it can be really lonely as well.
Yeah, no, well, you asked my opinion on this.
Yep.
I think the first thing you said, it's lonely, is a super important thing to point out. And I would actually add, the higher you go on the proverbial food chain in an institutional model, the lonelier it gets, because ultimately you are now a decision maker whose choices impact other people. And you can keep counsel of your assistants. And at the same time, there are decisions that you have to make at times that they don't have the capacity to understand. And I would say, how are you surrounding yourself with other people in your role as a support system, right? So there's, at the athletic director level, there's the state athletic director association, there's the league athletic directors group, right? And then as the president of the school, right, they have got to connect with other presidents, because they're the only people that understand those challenges. And I think that's such an astute observation, Brandon, that I wish anybody listening to this can understand, navigate, and plan for. What does my personal board of directors look like, so that I am not wearing all of this myself, right? And that's the important deal. It's like, it might be your partner at home, right? It might be Coach Katz and Coach Williams, or whoever else is in your circle. But I don't think that gets enough attention when you're in a role where you're a decision maker. It's ultimately like, you're gonna have to make some decisions that people aren't happy with, and it's lonely. So I love that. And then I would say this, to your point of, yeah, it's addicting. I can't wait for school to start every year, because of the havoc and the things that go on that you get to problem solve. And while you were talking, I'm sitting here thinking about Sean, who's a really successful lawyer, your brother, and it was taking me to the LSAT. And it's like, that entire thing is problem solving. So it's like, basically, you're either going to be a lawyer, or you're going to put out fires and coach and solve problems. And that's the thing that's addicting, because it's like this never ending puzzle of challenges that you not only get to solve, but help others learn using the vehicle of athletics to do that themselves as they navigate to the next part of their journey. So that's the piece that I enjoy. And I'm also constantly trying to figure out how to set our direct reports, so to speak, up for success, so that they are learning that, and that they can take over, so that I can enjoy just the fun part of it all. But that's a whole nother deal. Yeah. Number 5, you got to manage your players' expectations. What do you mean by that, as an obvious, but then also what's the not so obvious, that's the hidden part of that iceberg?
Yeah, I think the head coach ultimately is responsible for those hard conversations in terms of, a player enters a program as a freshman with expectations of playing or whatever whatever their expectations are coming into a program. A freshman, I heard this the other day. This to me makes sense. Freshman wants to play. Sophomores want to start. Juniors want to score. Seniors want to win.
Yep.
So let's just use those as general expectations. Okay. Now a head coach's job is to manage those expectations. And it goes back to, well, it's a race to figure it out. And part of figuring it out is getting a player to buy into their role and helping them to manage their development and their expectations. I think the not so obvious part on that, and this is a huge challenge, is you have to manage the player's expectations and the outside influences that come with them. And that's the really hard part as a head coach. And he said, well, what's hard about it? Okay. As an assistant coach, I could massage a lot of those conversations. I could be big brother. I could be really encouraging. I could dance around the subjects a little bit to keep everybody happy. But when you're the head coach, you cannot do that. You've got to cut right to the chase, and you've got to be truthful, and you got to be honest. You cannot massage those conversations whatsoever. And let me say this, like outside influence. Well, what are outside influences? Well, parents, uncles, AU coaches, trainers, everybody has a vested interest in the individual playing and being successful. Well, the moment that individual isn't getting the playing time or the shots or the success that those outside influences want, there now becomes maybe some intentional or some unintentional messaging to the player, right? And this happens at every level, okay? And so I don't think this is just a Division I head coaching problem. I think that youth sports have to deal with this. And so as a head coach, how do you manage the expectations and the outside influences that come with them? And when you transition from assistant coach to head coach, are you willing to maybe damage some of those relationships in the process? Right. Are you willing to upset that AAU coach because you're not playing his guy? Are you willing to upset the trainer that has spent all summer working on that guy's shot, and now you're telling him he can't shoot threes? And these are just examples. Mm-hmm. How are you going to manage the text message from the mom, the dad, the brother, or the uncle that comes in when so-and-so only plays 3 minutes in a game? And again, being blunt, being truthful, being honest, and doing your best. As a head coach, you've got to be prepared to tackle those issues as they come through. I think that's just the best way to say it. And again, there's no sugarcoating the answer. You know what I mean? Like you've got to be ready to kind of hit those things straight on. And you also have to be prepared to understand that those entities are only seeing a very small glimpse. They're not seeing the data and the months and months of meetings and behind the scenes work that ultimately is leading to the decision. And so for me, I always just share that. Yeah. I always just share that. Yeah. I'd say, like, we've tracked 1,000 shots. Here's what he's shooting. He was late for practice. Did he tell you that? He had an altercation with an assistant coach in a locker room that we need to address, whatever it may be. And these are just examples. Yeah. But those are things that, hey, are you aware of that? And I think you have to be prepared to have those conversations, and just do the best you can with them at that point.
Yeah. And I'm going to just point out one thing before we move on here is the idea of managing expectations, specifically identifying roles, clearly painting those, and allowing athletes to have success in whatever that role happens to be. But also, what I want to point out, what you said, is you can't sugarcoat some of these things when you become the head coach. It's like at some point you got to be direct, and you can tiptoe around it, and it's going to get to that point eventually. You're a whole lot better off just leaning right into that conversation. It's going to be messy, but it gets you to the other side a lot quicker than trying to massage it throughout the course of the time. And, this is for all those out there that, I've stolen from another place, but life's not fair. Like, get used to it. And ultimately this is only going to help your son grow. And, I promise you, we have his or her best interests at heart the same way we do with the team. And those conversations aren't going away until you have them.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing too. It's what's in the best interest of the team.
Right.
And I think when you're an assistant coach, you can massage some of that and you can keep the individual's interest at heart. And as a head coach, you still have the individual's best interest at heart,
Right.
but the best interest of the team is always above that. And it's just, I wrote some down. Coach Katz always said outside influences must be addressed every day. And can you shift the focus to being a great teammate and sacrificing for the team versus the pressure of performing outside of your role that comes from outside influences? And that's just a tug of war that a head coach has to be prepared to deal with every day.
Yep. And I would simplify that even more so to something my president has said, which is, how can you learn to see the success of someone else without seeing it as a loss for yourself, right? So it's like, hey, this guy's starting, I need to be excited for him, rather than like somehow it's a zero-sum game, right? And it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to teach. And it's a hard thing to do in life, but that's the reality of any space you work in. What about, we talked a little bit about being a problem solver and why that for me is the addictive part of this. Can you talk a little bit about things that you needed to deal with that led to that being on the list?
Yeah. So number 6, right? Being a head coach, you got to be a problem solver. I put the not obvious part is you need to wake up every day and go into the, not going to the office, but from the moment you wake up every day, expect 3 unexpected things to happen. And not only do you need to be prepared to solve those, but you need to have your schedule organized so that you can solve those things. And I think that's another big part of that, but that's a separate issue.
Google Calendar, y'all.
Yeah, there you go. Good shout out. Some NLI money for you. I mean, here's to me like things that I don't know. I'm sure somebody's experienced this before. And I referenced this earlier in the year or earlier in the podcast. We traveled down to play UC Riverside. It's December, I want to say maybe 19th. Oh, somewhere December 19th. Let's call it December 19th. And it's our last game before we go to Christmas break. Everybody's going to fly home from there. So we prep. We're anxious. We're itching to play. I think I told you, we're coming off the Montana State games and we're chippy with each other and we learned a lot. And so we have kind of a 10-day period before we're getting ready to play UC Riverside. And it's our last game before Christmas break. Everybody's fired up. We're excited. And I remember getting a call from our trainer that said the game may not go today. UC Riverside had a player test positive, something like that, something like those effects. Everybody knows the story. 10 minutes before tip off, I walk into the locker room. The guys think I'm coming in to do the pregame speech.
As I pack it up,
they had already warmed up.
Yep.
They're sweating. They're getting ready to stand up and I think do our pregame hug, our pregame prayer. They're getting ready to play. And I say, hey guys, game's off. And they're like, what? Like practical joke, right? No practical joke. Game's off. Out of an abundance of caution, both administrations have decided to cancel the game. This was when the new wave of COVID was starting to hit. We were on the front end of it.
Yep.
Before Christmas. So that was that happened not once to us, but twice.
Right.
So everyone goes home for Christmas, leaves LA. We come back on Christmas Day, practice and travel on, I don't know, like the 26th or 27th, somewhere in there. And the same thing happens at Oregon State 30 minutes before tip off. So as a head coach, how do you deal with not just playing the games, but the emotional toll and the frustration and the exhaustion that comes from that? Mm-hmm. All right. To me, those were the extreme examples of unexpected things that aren't in the coach's handbook. Right. Those are just, those are huge challenges. And then, how are you developing your team? How are you running your race? Mm-hmm. How are you keeping your guys active in practice? Yep. How are you developing your offense and your counters when you're not seeing, live defenses? Yep. And those are the tactical X and O's things, and this is the other part. And everyone went through this, but how do you deal with COVID? And then at that point, I think I told you 5 of our next 6 are on the road as we start Big Sky play. Yeah. We coached one game with 8 guys and 2 coaches. We had a coach out. So, when I was bumped to head coach, my position wasn't replaced.
Yeah.
So we were already down a staff member. Then we were down another staff member, and just, how do you deal with the unexpected, right? How do you deal with all of that? And then, so here's what I introduced to the team. And again, it's not unique to me. I didn't come up with it, but the Stockdale paradox. So I introduced, hey, do you guys know who James Stockdale is? Went through the story and talked about this. And this became a theme for us because we were in the midst of what became a very challenging season at that point. Like I said, from the time we were 3-2 to now fast forward to mid-January, where we might have lost like 5 or 6 in a row, and we're dealing with all these unexpected challenges. We introduced the Stockdale paradox, which essentially is, right, can you maintain a sense of optimism while at the same time facing the brutal facts of your reality? Right. Guys, here's the brutal facts of our reality. They're not changing. Those games got canceled. We're not remaking them up. We're in the middle of COVID. We're on the road. We're losing. We're struggling. We're not playing well. We're frustrated. Here's what's ahead of us. How can we maintain a sense of optimism and balance this out moving forward? And so I think that was my answer, as a head coach, was try to, number one, stay organized because things are going to pop up that you don't expect. Mm-hmm. And then number two, have some sort of teaching format that's going to allow your guys to kind of grow and understand those challenges.
Yeah. And I was going to say, because you said it earlier, that you can't have a bad day as a head coach, and that eternal optimism and positivity and the energy that you bring is needed in those moments. It's like, hey, this sucks. And we wanted to play tonight, but hey, we got to see Corvallis. And I think it's interesting. This is irrelevant to pretty much anyone else, but Admiral James Stockdale was a prisoner of war and was in Vietnam at that time. And the brutal reality is they're not getting out anytime soon, but the belief that eventually we will. And when they asked him who made it and who didn't, his answer was the people that didn't make it were the optimists. And by that, it wasn't you stay positive. It was that, hey, this is the reality of our situation, and we're going to continue to be positive, and we're going to continue to work towards that goal. Ironically enough, his 2 sons were my high school teachers and coach, and his granddaughter is our women's basketball coach here. So small world, but way to bring that one into it.
That's great. That's great.
Okay. I think it's funny to see this on your list for me, because I think relationship and communication is probably the biggest thing we do as coaches, even though it doesn't get the shine and the attention. And that you mentioned the word ATM earlier. And I got this off of another episode, and I've shared it a few times, but Chad Sanji made this comment. He said, relationships are like bank accounts. You have to have more deposits than you take withdrawals. And that you mentioned that earlier, where you were just making withdrawals the whole year, right? And it's just draining. That speaks to the nature of those relationships, right? And it's not really a financial, you don't want a transactional relationship, but it's like the more deposits you make in another person, the better opportunity there is to help them grow later when you need to ask for a different behavior, right? So can you talk a little bit about the obvious communication relationships are critical with a head coach and their players? But I mean, that is obvious, but what's the not so obvious that you learned through this year?
The not so obvious is that dynamic's going to change when you move from assistant coach to head coach, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I tried my hardest to be the same person I've always been. My title is different. My role is different. Who I am as a person, my authenticity, my honesty, my genuineness tried to remain the same. I don't think any of the players changed either. Right. But the reality is, when you walked in the office and it was the first time I was a head coach, that conversation was different. Yeah. It was different. It just is. And I think it's different on 2 fronts. It's different for, let's say, the freshman who's wide-eyed and doesn't get all this.
Yep.
And is inexperienced in all this, and his head's swimming anyways. And Coach Laird, he's always the cool coach. He's the one that had my back. He's the one that came over and put his arm around me when I was struggling, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To now, coach is kicking me out of drills when I'm not doing great. And it's like, Coach, what's up, man? Like that dynamic's different.
You're my guy. What happened?
What happened, right?
Still your guy.
And then I'm still your guy, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then I think the other part was the guy who's maybe been there 3 or 4 years that was used to Coach Katz being the head coach, mm-hmm. And And there's an adjustment on that side as well. That adjustment was a lot easier, but the point of it is another Coach Katzism. There's no such thing as over communication. Here's what I would say. You're not rebuilding the relationship, but you're rebuilding the trust.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, look, I'm the same guy. You're the same guy. We're still going for the same goals. Everything we've talked about is still in front of us, but the dynamic's just going to be a little bit different here. Yeah. You know what I mean? And you have to trust that I still have your best interests at heart. You have to trust that I'm still going to help you grow and develop into the best person and basketball player that you can be. And you have to trust that me as a head coach is still going to try and do that for you. And that it's an adjustment, just plain and simple. And I think the faster you can rebuild that trust, the easier that transition is.
Yeah. And I would also add, based on what you just shared, it is different and there's nothing you can do about it. And at the end of the day, the sooner you name it, the sooner you draw those boundary lines and help everybody understand the role that you are now inhibiting. And I don't think it needs to be as extreme as Herb Brooks when he was like, I'm here to be your coach. I'm not here to be your friend. You want a friend, talk to those guys. But at the same time, there's a certain aspect of that that's true. The next one you had, I really like, and it's funny to me, and I'll share why in a second, but your workload will triple when you become the head coach, right? That's obvious. And so much so that, as I told you earlier, as you move up the proverbial food chain, as you become the administrator or whatever, it triples again to the point where, like, half the time, if you ask me, hey, how was today? I was great. Well, what'd you do today? I have no idea what I did today. Right? It's like you're managing these things that you had no intention that you were going to have to deal with. And to your point, well, today was going to be this, but now it's this. Can you talk a little bit more about the not so obvious pieces of that workload tripling and how you manage that?
Yeah. The most obvious, the not so obvious piece is the most valuable word you need to learn is no. No. I'm going to back that up by saying, do you care more about winning or completing your project, or someone viewing you as a jerk because you said no? All right. Because again, there's only 24 hours in a day. It goes back to the basketball season as a race, and you have to figure it out, and you want to try to figure it out as fast as you can. And the more time you can put into figuring it out, which means coaching your team, developing that trust with your players, right? Point number 7 that we just talked about. All those previous bullet points we just talked about takes time, takes energy, is going to be challenged by people that also want your time and energy. Okay. And it's not a bad thing. All right. I don't want to paint that as a bad thing. It's a good thing. Okay. But the number of meetings, emails, voice messages, text messages, media requests, they are going to serve a purpose, and they're important. Are they important on your totem pole? Are they in your top 3 priorities? Are those things helping you win? Right. And ultimately, you have to be able to be comfortable saying no. Hey, thank you for your interest. I apologize, I can't go to lunch with you today. I know this meeting is really important, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no. We can't do it right now. Can we do it next Tuesday? Being comfortable saying no, and being comfortable knowing that it might even upset some people is your job. It's not your job. It's something you're going to have to be comfortable with as a leader, as an administrator, as a head coach. And that's just the reality. That's just the reality of it. And I do understand now why, as you move up the food chain, if you have the ability to hire a communications director, or, if I am in this position, when I'm in this position again, if I have an ability to hire almost a full-time person who can manage what I call the communication system, you got to have it. Because you don't want to burn relationships and you don't want to be a jerk, but at the same time, you have to prioritize what's important to you. And I also think when you're an assistant coach and you become a head coach, that transition is really hard, because you don't want people to think, oh, you're a head coach now. No, you're big time now. You're a head coach now. You're big time. You don't have time for me anymore. That's not really what it's about. Right. You know what I mean? It's just more about understanding the priorities of the job, and it shifts,
Yep. Yeah. Well, and again, I'll take this back to something you and I both know. And you have this on the sheet, but you didn't mention it. It's you kind of move from the big brother to the parent role. And what I tell my kids, assume the answer is no. You can still ask and we could talk about things, but we're starting from that place and then we'll go wherever we're going. Right. And it's like, that's the reality. 24-hour day. I joke with one of my students. I'm still waiting for the 48-hour day to show up so I can be more productive. And whatever that is, systems are important, right? How do you schedule your time? Google Calendar, again. How are you setting up expectations and training people to communicate with you, right? Are you constantly on the email getting alerts, or do you batch them? Do people know that if you want an immediate response, it's this method versus this method, right? And I think that's something that we learn as we grow in whatever role. But taking what you just said, developing systems to protect yourself from all that outside noise, super important. And it goes right with what you were saying. All right. College athletics. At the end of the day, for 99% of the universities, the goal is to win. Like, how can we put the most successful statistical program on the board year in, year out? That's the goal, right? Winning is the obvious goal, what we want to do. What's the not so obvious stuff that comes with that?
Yeah, in my opinion, this is the part we all struggle with as coaches. And I think it's the hardest part of being a head coach, the hardest part at any level, I think it's one of the biggest challenges in sports that we have today. Winning is always the outcome, right? It's not about participation trophies. It's about winning. There's a winner and there's a loser. It's very black and it's very white. Not so obvious. And I relearned this year. I relearned it. I've always believed this, and we could talk about this as well. Believing something, implementing it, and like being true to it is really hard. But let me get so that chasing a standard of performance, how you're going to win, will get you farther and will help you enjoy the process more.
Yep.
So winning is the ultimate goal. But chasing a standard of performance and teaching your team to perform to a standard is going to get you farther than focusing on winning. All right. And I know millions of books have been written about it. There's probably hundreds of podcasts on it today. I'm pretty sure on our first podcast, we talked about this, but here I am again as a head coach. And I talked about it earlier. When you start putting the pressure of winning onto a group and you make winning the ultimate outcome and the ultimate goal, it's not as effective, in my opinion, as establishing a standard of performance. All right. And I think when you are able to get your team to buy into a standard of performance and you get them to buy into being a great teammate versus individual goals, and you get them to focus on getting a little bit better today and all of those small things that go into standards of performance, at the end of the day, you're going to find that your team plays with more freedom, they play with more confidence, and they're not paralyzed by the outcome. We had talked about this going all the way back to the first team meeting in my backyard at my house, that we were going to have to do something very special this year in order to keep the team together. All right. I made the mistake of putting the pressure on the team to win those Montana games. Mm-hmm. And then, like we talked about, then COVID hit, things went sideways. We started losing. Our guys were competing their butts off, but we were losing. And the losing perpetuated losing. And we got away from having fun. We got away from developing. We got away from being good teammates. And we started focusing maybe even on individual pursuits. And what happens is, again, is like when winning was the ultimate outcome, guys were missing free throws. Guys were making mistakes they don't normally make. Again, because I think they become paralyzed by the outcome. All right. I remember, so at some point during the year, we got crushed by Southern Utah at home. And I remember walking to the locker room on a Monday, and we had about 3 weeks left in our season, 3 or 4 weeks left in our season. And I was like, you know what, guys, like our one goal had all been all season, like, let's win the conference tournament. Let's boom, boom, boom. Our focus was on winning.
Yep.
Okay. And as hard as I tried to navigate around that, the focus was on winning. And then at some point during that process, we changed and we just said, hey, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to focus on being the best teammates we can be. We're going to focus on doing things right. And we're going to focus on getting 1% better each day, something along those lines. We traveled to Weber State that week, who was, one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the league. We're beating them at halftime. Our guys are playing loose. They're playing free. They're competing their butts off. We ended up losing a close competitive game. And it's funny, you know what we did after the loss? We went bowling that night. We went bowling. And I remember we were bowling. I remember our guys competed as hard that night as they had in any other game during the year. But they had fun doing it.
Yep.
And they were mad they lost. You don't care less when you lose, but the perspective was different. Like, you know what, guys? Hey, we competed really hard tonight.
Right.
Man, I'm really proud of, man, you balled out. We didn't get the win, but you balled out, man. You competed hard. We got better. We felt good about ourselves. We went bowling that night. I remember being in the bowling alley and looking around, and the guys were laughing and having a good time. And I said, you know what? Like, this is it right here. Mm-hmm. This is how I want to coach. This is the experience I want the guys to have. We went the next night. We went and played at Idaho State, who had been playing really well at that point, and won a really tough road game at Idaho State. We proceeded from then on to win, I think, 5 of our next 6. And we played, I thought, going into the tournament and that last month of the season, we were playing as well as anybody in the conference. And if you were to ask me, well, what was different? Just our perspective.
Yep.
Just the perspective.
Yep.
The perspective of, let's chase a standard of performance. Let's focus on being great teammates.
Yep.
Let's focus on getting a little bit better each day. Yep. And God, man, those guys, then all of a sudden you would see guys take chances. You know what I mean? You would see them be a lot more confident in the shots they were shooting. And you saw a group that actually played together, and the sum of the parts all of a sudden became greater than the individual. And that's, I mean, I think that's just such a hard thing for coaches to figure out. How do you get your team to that moment? And here's the other thing, when you're losing, and because we were losing, when you're losing, how do you say, let's not focus on winning? Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think it's a proverbial challenge in being coach of any sport. And the irony of it for me is, if we go back and run the first episode that you did, and we run Katz's back to back, like, he was speaking about that conundrum. Like, the pressure to win is so big, you can't enjoy it in the moment. And you were talking about, hey, I'm a whimsical guy and I want to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And it sounds like, from November until that trip to Utah and Idaho, you were trying to figure out how to get back to that. And you finally did. Wrapping this question up, can you give 1 or 2 things that shifted for you, rather than just the focus? Hey, we're going to focus on these things, but no, like your actual behaviors and how you manage things in disappointment that helped lead to the culture that you created late in the season.
Yeah, it's an easy answer for me. I had 2 seniors on my team, Bryce Fowler and Will Fitzpatrick. Those guys were freaking studs, man. And I looked at the pain that they were carrying and the frustration they were playing with. They weren't having fun. They weren't enjoying it. It's not what they came back for, because they were using their 5th year, their COVID year. And I looked at them, I was like, man, this isn't right. Right. This isn't right. Like, these guys have invested so much into this program, and these guys are such great players, and they're such great people, and they're such great human beings, and they're such great leaders. Right. How, as a coach, am I failing them? Right. How am I not maximizing this opportunity for them? Right. And I listened. I stopped telling everyone what we were going to do, and I just started listening to them, and I started listening to them say what they needed and what they wanted. And honestly, at that point, I stepped back and I let them lead, and I let them have fun.
Yeah.
And again, we went bowling. We did movie nights.
Yep.
We made it an experience where they stayed connected and they led each other, and it became their team, not my team. And again, I think once I took my external pressure off of them, they then excelled.
Yeah.
Will Fitzpatrick had 5 games where he made 5 or more threes.
Yeah.
Bryce Fowler was the best player in the league the last 5 weeks of the season. I mean, he was unstoppable.
Yeah.
And those guys, they became not great players, but great leaders, and they rallied everyone else around them. So again, I just, as a head coach, having the ability to step back, listen, let them lead, and find ways to maximize their experience.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And I'm sitting here like thinking to myself, like, this Pete Carroll does this at the NFL level.
Yeah.
Right. And their teams have won Super Bowls and been successful. And there's lots of different ways to lead. There's lots of different ways to win. I think at the end of the day, it's right about finding kind of an authentic vision that fits you and your personality.
Yep.
And I think early in the year, we were just running on emotion.
Yeah.
We were running on guts. And I think we were all trying to figure out this transition. And then the middle of the season happened, and I think we were just all frustrated and tired and couldn't figure out who we were as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we were able to step back and let the team take over and let Bryce and Will take over, man, like I said, we were good. I thought we were as good as anybody the last 3 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing to do as a coach, is to step back and let your athletes lead. But as you and I both know, the teams that have the best capacity to do that generally outperform the ones where the coach is micromanaging everything and calling all the shots. And to your point, I think one of our most impactful practices this year, in the stretch of 22 days of not playing because of COVID and other things, it was like our practice was playing beach volleyball and spike ball. And it translated into a winning streak because that competitiveness and enjoyment of the guys became the norm at practice, right? And so, like, how do you create those opportunities as a coach where you dial back the pressure of what everybody else is worrying about? And it's like, let's just be together, you know? And I think it's the transition here is that you had this run through the year to get to that point where you realize, okay, this is what it really is about. And developing that takes time, right? And developing a winning culture takes time. And you guys had one at Sac State in all of those years. Even the years you weren't good, the culture was a winning culture. That's obvious. We know it takes time. What's the not so obvious about building that type of culture?
Yeah, so I think this is the last one. And I think this is something we're going to have to study and analyze, as a society moving forward, or as college basketball coaches moving forward. The game has changed, and I don't know. You have to win now. You have to win now. I think the years of building a culture and building a program, I'm not going to say they don't exist anymore, but I think that challenge has gotten a lot harder.
Yeah.
There's cultural norms in terms of, I don't want to say entitlement, but instant gratification for sure. There are rule changes with the transfer portal and the NIL, where you've taken a team sport and given opportunities for individuals to capitalize on their individual performance. And I just think that there's, again, a pressure to win now. And again, we all want to win. But building a winning culture takes time. St. Peter's this year, Shaheen Holloway. I thought that was one of the best NCAA runs I've ever seen. That team was locked in, man. They were freaking good in every area. Do you know, I don't know how many years he's been there. I want to say 4 or 5 years. Do you know what his record was his first year there? And this is not a knock on Shaheen. He's a great coach. Do you have any idea what his record was?
I looked it up, and I remember it was like 4-22 or something like that.
He was 10-22 his first year.
There you go.
St. Peter's. I got this a lot in the spring. Every mid-major or low major nowadays, they want they want to be the next St. Peter's. Yeah. Are you willing to stick with that coach and that program and how he wants to build it, over a 3 or 4 year period to become St. Peter's, or do you want to win now?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
For sure.
And again, there's lots of different ways you can do it. And I think the transfer portal allows you to win now.
Yeah.
But are you building a sustainable winning culture?
Right.
And that makes me wonder as a coach also, how do you recruit and develop a freshman? How do you recruit and develop a sophomore? Can you do that? You might be able to do that if you're building a sustainable culture. But if you're focusing on winning now every year, I'm really concerned about the freshmen and sophomores in college basketball now and what that looks like, and again, the part about the long-term approach is if you start cutting corners or you start taking unnecessary risks, when you're 10 and 22 and you're slowly building it up to get to where you want to go, but you have the external pressure of winning now, there's an inherent pressure to take unnecessary risks and an inherent pressure to stunt development. And so I think there's this big dilemma of building a winning culture over a 2 or 3 or 4 year period versus building winning seasons now. Yeah. And I don't know what that dilemma looks like. And I would say that the not obvious point of that is, as college basketball coaches, and if you want to be a head coach, you better figure it out.
Yeah, for sure.
You better figure it out. And for me, I would have to figure that out. Would I have the time to develop a winning culture over a 2 or 3 year period? I'm a Bill Walsh guy, right? And his first year with the Niners, they were 2-14. In his second year, they were 6-10. But what he was doing was laying a groundwork and laying a foundation for future success, probably a lot like Shaheen Holloway was doing at Seton Hall.
Yep.
And you're doing it without cutting corners, and you're doing it without taking unnecessary risks. And I think a big challenge now today in college basketball at every level is, can you build a program with that foundation again over a 2 or 3 or 4 year period? Or do you have to try to win every single year? And if you have to win every single year, in a lot of ways, you now become like a junior college coach where you're just rebuilding your roster every year.
Yeah, which isn't the intention of education-based athletics, but at the end of the day, that's what it's become, right? And you got to navigate that. That's
the model, right?
Yep, yeah, for sure. And I think that that's an interesting place to be in, as there's not a lot of policy around these new developments yet. And I think you're going to see a lot of changes in the next 10 years, and how people navigate that. Ultimately, I hope that they continue to put the athlete at the center of the equation and not use them to build their brand on the back of the athletes. But that's also the challenge there as well. Let me ask this, Coach, before we wrap up. It's been a great opportunity to learn, and I hope people were able to take some notes. But as a UC Davis alum and going to Sac State, which you've mentioned a couple times as the rival, and spending that time there, and 11 years of athletes, 49 out of 50 graduated, the time that you put in there with the Sac State way and Coach Katz, what do you want the guys that are still there, right, that are alums of the Coach Katz tree, what do you want that experience to be like for them this year? And what do you want the alums that are now out in the world to hear in regards to your message for them?
Yeah, no, look, it's home base, right? It's always home base. That's in the recruiting process. Sac State was going to be the home base for the remainder of their lives, and that shouldn't change. They should also feel a sense of pride in knowing that they helped build that program into what it is today, and they left it a better place than they found it, and they should feel a sense of pride in that. Again, the program's in a much better spot today than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 14 years ago when Coach Katz took over, right? And I think a lot of credit goes to those alums that took a chance on Coach Katz and took a chance on coming to Sac State because they wanted to be a part of something unique and special. They wanted to be a part of a building process.
Right.
You know, they wanted to be a part of the first group at Sac State to win a Big Sky championship, or the first group at Sac State to go to the NCAA tournament. That was always a chip on those guys' shoulders. And so I hope, you know, whenever that happens, that, you know, that they can take some satisfaction in knowing that they played a small part of that.
Yeah. No, and I love that. And it's something that, you know, when South Carolina won the national championship a couple years ago, Don Staley, you know, made a point to send a replica trophy to all of the former women's basketball players that had gone through there. And my assistant AD is a former player, and she has this thing in her office. And I was like, oh, what is this? And she kind of told me the story, but it's that you're planting seeds that and watering them that you may never see grow. Right. Yeah. And that's ultimately what life is about, right? How are you improving the journey for someone else? How are you serving others? Sure. And with that, the last thing I kind of want to know is, as you set up for the next chapter, when you're going to be a head coach again, what are the things that, without a shadow of a doubt, when somebody hires Brandon Laird to run their program, what are you getting?
Yeah, I wasn't prepared for this question. You're getting
These are always the best answers, Coach.
I know. And I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that because I've spent so much time reflecting on the last 11 years. But look, you're through this entire process, I've always tried to be very genuine and very authentic. You know, look, I'm a basketball guy. I love basketball, you know, but I also love what basketball can do for you. It can give you a lot of life lessons. It makes you a part of a team, and it makes you a part of a family, and it gives you a brotherhood and relationships and connections that are going to last a lifetime. Basketball challenges you. But ultimately, like, basketball is not a sport that you can play forever. So when you hang it up, hopefully Brandon Laird's program has also given you the life skills that you can move forward and be successful with. It's also, again, giving you a home base, some place that you can always look back and feel good about. And it's giving you the support, the necessary support that you needed to achieve your dreams, whatever those dreams may be, you know. And look, and we can talk about this. I think there was a time and point, I've gotten this question a lot, like, do I still want to coach? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I am not, unless something amazing pops up tomorrow, you know, I'm not planning on coaching this year, but I'm trying to become a better coach during this pause. You know, I'm going to be out and try to get to as many practices as I can get to. I want to try to get back and work on my building my network and trying to go back and maybe serve and help some of those people that helped me all those years. And there's a lot of things that I want to do basketball wise to stay involved in the game. And I bring that up because that's the question that I get when I talk to somebody. They're constantly asking me, well, do you still want to coach? And I was like, yeah. You know, I'm going to coach for sure. You know, and I was in this process with, my wife over the last few months, and, you know, she brought up two things that resonate with me. And the first one was, we met in 2012, got married in 2015. And she said, this is the first time I'm not seeing you coaching. Right. And she says, coaching is who you are. You know, there's an element of me, mm-hmm. my soul and my spirit that is just a coach at heart. Mm-hmm. Right. And I say that because that's what you're going to get. You know, that's the authenticity and the genuineness of me. There isn't a false identity of me, you know, trying to be a head coach. It's just me being a leader and doing the best I can, you know. And, a second thing that she had said to me at one point during our discussions, because she'd asked me, or I don't know, maybe I was frustrated one day, and I said, you know what, maybe I should just get out of coaching and go do something else. And she said, well, what are you going to tell Nixon in 10 years when he asked you why you stopped coaching, and Nixon being our 2.5-year-old son. And I had to really stop and think about that for a second. Was I going to tell him that I quit because I had a frustrating experience, or because things didn't work out here at this last place? Am I going to give up on coaching now all of a sudden because because things didn't work out, or because this one experience again had a frustrating end? And the answer is no. No, I'm not gonna give in on that. If anything, I feel like I'm a better coach today than I was 12 months ago. And I also believe that in the coaching business at any level, whether it's high school or college, but especially I think the higher you go, the Division I level and the professional level, I think that, Coach Williams, who's just been great to me through this whole process, he told me this: everyone goes, most coaches go through this. This is part of the coaching profession. There's nobody that hasn't experienced, being out of a job, or not getting a job, or being fired from a job. Right. And so, I'm earning my scars, and I felt like I walked through the fire last year, and in a lot of ways, I think when you walk through the valley and you walk through the fire and you come out of that and you got some scars on your face and some blood on your nose and all those things, I think you come out, a better leader and a better coach and a better person. And so I think that's a long-winded answer to, when I become a head coach again, what are you going to get? I think you're going to get a coach with a lot of experience. You're going to get a coach who's a good family man. Yep. You get a coach who tries to do things the right way. You're going to get a coach who helps individuals reach their dreams. You're going to get a coach who develops winning programs the right way.
Awesome. I lied. I'm going to ask one more question because it came up while I was listening to you in our first recording. You used the term closed doors or blessings, and I've appropriated that from you since that moment. I've also shared with you many times that I firmly believe that sometimes our best decisions are made by other people. You actually wrote this into your email to your guys, as the saying goes, when one door closes, another one opens. What's been the greatest blessing of this situation for you, of this time, that a choice was made for you per se, rather than what you were hoping happened? What's been the greatest blessing that you've had as a result of this?
Time and space. And time and space means multiple things. Time and space to become a better coach. Well, let me start time and space to reflect on the last 11 years. Yeah. Time and space to reflect on those 6 months when I was the head coach and what I learned. So instead of rushing into another job and not taking the time and space to say, hey, well, what'd you learn from that?
Right.
So time and space to reflect, time and space to say, to sit with the tough emotions. How about that?
Yeah.
And time and space to say, no, look, I am frustrated. Yeah. Time and space to say, I really wanted that job and it didn't work out. And yeah, mad about it, frustrated about it, but that's fuel for the fire moving forward, right? As long as I'm processing it in the right way. Yeah. And I think the last part of this is time and space for family, which you don't get a lot as a coach at any level, but especially a Division I coach. Yeah. So I'm joking with a lot of people, and I'm crushing daddy daycare right now. Crushing daddy daycare, doing a lot of 3-day weekends with my wife, training for a marathon. I'm going to run the CIM.
Let's go.
Working on my golf game. So time and space for my own personal health, time and space for my family, but ultimately time and space to become a better coach, and time and space to look in the mirror and look at the scars that I think I earned. Yeah. And to know that, I have enough faith to know that the right job's going to come up at the right time. And that next time I'm going to be better prepared for it. And I'm going to crush it, next time I get that opportunity.
Love it. Well, hell, man, it's been a marathon since you're training for one. I think we go a couple more hours. We'll be able to listen to this while you're running, but appreciate you taking the time and carving it out so that we could revisit the original OG downloaded pod here with Coach Brandon Laird.
Thanks, Justin. I appreciate it.